What's up, guys? Big Papa Drock back with another Raid Shadow Legends video, and I hope you guys are doing well because we have got a spicy topic to talk about today, and it's a topic that I've wanted to talk about for a while because it's bothered me for a while. It's bothered me now for, well, honestly, multiple years, but it's still bothering me in spite of it getting better, and that is, yes, where are the buffs, Plarium? Where are the buffs? Because we are now into August in 2024, and I just feel like there haven't been enough buffs, remotely close to enough buffs. Like, you know, let's look at this topic basically over the course of the last couple years, right? Because I think this is important to give context. If you've played Raid for a while now, you might know or you might not know how many champions there are. So this is important. I didn't even know the answer to this, but there are 862 champions in the game currently. That is crazy. But what really surprised me was there are 275 legendary champions. Wow. I honestly did not realize it was that many in the game. And I guess it makes sense when you start to look through, because every faction now has a bunch of legendaries, right? You can start popping in here and there's Lego after Lego after Lego after Lego. So they've added an insane amount of legendaries to this game, for better or worse, right? You know, it's always fun to get a new champion, but it's also always frustrating when you pull a bad champion when you are going for a new champion. And it also just drives like across the point. You know, they've changed these progressive chance events, right? Or they've given us better rates where now instead of only having a 10x on events, now you have up to a 25x. But holy smokes, when you are dealing with 275 legendary champions, my God, does that tell you just how low your chances are of getting the legendary champion you want? Now that's a separate video. That's not what we're going to talk about today, but it was just something to occur to me while we're looking at this, because good Lord, the 10x is a massive scam. And frankly, 15x and 25x isn't much better, because I did not realize the math on this stuff. And now, to be fair to Plarium, some of these legendaries you can't pull from shards, but they're a very, very, very small percentage, right? So let's talk about buffs, because I went back and I looked, and last year, if you guys didn't know, in 2023, we had a grand total of, I think it was maybe 9 buffs. I went and I looked at this and I actually calculated, but now I've forgotten the number, but it was less than 10. We had, let's say, 9 buffs across an entire year. 9 legendary champion buffs out of 275 champions. Holy smokes, last year was bad. And it was one of the biggest complaints that many, many people had of like, look, so many of these champions are just trash. They're just not usable in today's current game. You gotta buff them. And so Plarium said, sure, we're going to do that. We're going to buff champions. We're going to do more this year. But how many more have they actually done? Because I was curious. What is the number? Well, let's count it up, because I've actually done that. I have gone through all of the updates from this year and looked at how many we've gotten so far. Now, we can talk also about the quality of these buffs, because some of these buffs are legitimately good and are actually kit reworks. And some of them, for example, like Fortis, are absolute utter trash, where the only thing, and I don't know if you can see it, let me try zooming in here. The only thing that Fortis had done for his buff was a damage multiplier increase. And they made us wait over a year for that. He's still terrible. He's still a very bad champion. This to me is not something I would consider to be a buff for a champion. When I look at a buff, I want to see not only damage increases if it's a nuker, but I also want to see kit reworks, right? I want to see champions get better at doing what they're supposed to do, or in the case of some champions, actually having a role in the game, because many do not. Many are just straight up bad. And all they're there for is to screw your chance of pulling the champion you want. So let's look at how many buffs we've had this year. We had Fortis and Angar, so that's 2. We had Little Miss Annie, Supreme Aethel, and Siegfried, so that would be, what, 5? Then we had Manaya and Queen Ava, which makes 7 total buffs, followed by Claydna and Hackorn Smashlord. So now we're at 9 total buffs. Okay, then we go and we get, how many buffs we got here? Vitreous And Holzring, that puts us at 11 for the year. Oh, baby, really getting those numbers up. Great Hoof Loriaka and Jingwong makes 13. And now we have Noble and we have Lady of Ireth, which puts us at a grand whopping total of 15 buffs through the year. Guys, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. 15 buffs is not enough. It's just straight up not enough. When you have 275 legendary champions and you're telling me you've only had time in 8 months to buff 8 of them, that's just not good enough. We have to do better here, Plarium. I'm sorry. And now I know a lot of you will say, well, Drock, why do they care? Why do they care? They don't care. They're just going to introduce new champions, right? You know, they don't want you to get buffs on old champions. Well, there's some truth to that, right? Plarium is a money-making machine, and their focus with every single decision is how to wring as much cash out of you as they possibly can, because they are a business, and also because, frankly, Plarium tends to be a little bit greedy, if we're going to be completely honest. But I also think that if they were to buff more champions, they would have additional reasons for you to pull more shards. The more good champions that there are in the game, the more reasons for you to pull on 10Xs and 15Xs and 25Xs, right? And we all know these events happen constantly nowadays. So rare is it to get a break that we actually jump for joy when it happens. Such a difference from the raid of 3 or 4 years ago, when these events were super uncommon and not a constant thing. So here's the other thing too, right? When I think about buffs, and I talked about this, I think about what is the time that goes into doing this? Because if we're only doing 2 per month, and by the way, we're only doing legendaries. This is a really, really big point of contention that I have with Plarium, where we are only buffing legendary champions and maybe 1 mythical every once in a blue moon. And God knows there are a lot of bad mythicals now, and I'm going to do an entire another video on that because that has to change. Holy smokes, that is so awful. They are just polluting that pool aggressively, and it sucks. It really sucks. But not only are they only buffing legendaries, they're completely ignoring the epics. And guess what? There are 278 epics in this game. And I can guarantee you the vast majority of the epics are absolutely god-awful, right? They are, in some cases, worse than rares and worse than uncommons. And yet we have not seen a single buff in all of these things to address even 1 epic this year. I'm making this video because I want to see it improve, right? My hope is that people watch this. They might not, who knows? But my hope is that people share and watch this so that Plarium knows we care about this, right? And so that Plarium knows that, frankly, they need to do better. Because if you look at most of these buffs, they aren't things that take a long period of time to do in software development world. Let's, for example, look at Siegfried. What was the buff that Siegfried had done? Well, he had, let's see, his damage multiplier increased. That takes literally 3 seconds to code. He had his damage multiplier increased on his A2. That also takes 3 seconds to code. And, oh yeah, he had his damage multiplier increased on his A3, and he had ignore defense added to it. That takes maybe 5 to 10 seconds to code. I mean, like, you can't sit here and tell me that you can't buff more champions, Plarium. This takes no time at all to do. Literally, this would have taken you less than 10 minutes to change all of Siegfried with the buffs that you did here, right? The only other thing they did was they increased his block damage buff to 2 turns. Again, 5 seconds. That's just changing 1 value in the programming world, literally 1 value. And then they also changed on his support form that he gives a block damage buff on all allies for 2 turns instead of 1 turn. And they also made it so he gets a block damage buff as well. Again, these don't take long to code. So why in the world do we have so few buffs? Why, Plarium? That's what I want to know. Why? 2 a month isn't good enough when you have 275 legendary champions in a game and 278 epic champions in a game. Like, look, I don't expect you to buff rares, and certainly not uncommons or commons, although we all know you will definitely nerf rares as quickly as you possibly can. But for the love of God, man, why are we not doing 5 legendaries and 5 epics a month? Is it really that hard? I mean, 5 legendary champions, 5 epics a month. And I guarantee there are champions that are bad enough to deserve it. Let's just take a look. Let's take a look at one of these factions and start talking about where we might want to buff people. Well, Sathalia, we certainly need a buff on her. Could probably use a buff on Sigmund. Could definitely use a buff on Helior. Could use a buff for sure on Adeline. She's trash. Septimus has needed a buff for a very long time. Richtof is god-awful. Kaja is all right. You know, I mean, what? That's what, 5, 6 champions in one faction alone that I just pointed out that need buffs. Let's do another faction just for giggles. Eleanor's fine. Alexander definitely needs a buff for sure. Shirmani got a little bit of a buff recently. She's okay at best. Who else here? Garden is absolute trash. She definitely needs a buff, and she's a brand new champion, which is hilarious. You could argue, oh yeah, Ethos. Ethos needs a buff as well. Yeah, Ethos has been outclassed for forever now. Ethos definitely needs a buff. There's what, 3, 4 more champions in this faction alone? And again, none of this takes a long period of time to do. Who else needs a buff? I could say that Roshkar probably needs a buff nowadays. You know what I mean? Holzring just got one. Abest could use a buff. Glazea could use a buff. Isn't this a fun game to play? How many god-awful champions there are in this game? We got a Supreme Aethel and a Vitreous buff. Constantine could certainly use a little bit of a buff. There's 3 more champions. I mean, I could sit here and do this for every single faction in the game. There are at least 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 Legos in every faction that need serious buffs. Like Altan, for example. This guy is god-awful. He's god-awful. He's one of an OG champs. He's terrible. He's not even usable anymore for most accounts. Like if you're starting brand new, obviously any legend, well, maybe not any legendary because there are plenty bad ones. But the reason why I make this video is I just want to see this improve. And to me, there's no realistic reason why it shouldn't. You can't tell me that you can't go through each of these factions and pick a couple of champions every month, 5 of each, 5 epics, 5 Legos, and not do these kind of minor buffs that you've been doing. Because again, how many of these buffs actually included legitimate kit reworks? Fortis didn't. He was just a damage multiplier. Literally one of the absolute laziest things that I've seen. And the thing that sucks is Plarium has good designers and good programmers. They do. Like, they have really talented people. So why in the world did a champion that is god-awful, that is void, only get a damage multiplier increase when his entire kit is basically worthless? This isn't a buff. This is a joke. You know what I mean? This is an insult. Angar was a little bit better, got sort of a kit rework, sort of kind of, just changing some percentages here. Nothing crazy that takes a lot of time. Little Miss Annie got a solid buff. Definitely better, but again, not anything that takes a lot of time. I mean, there's only 2 small things here that were changed. You know, like none of this takes a lot of time. So I'm left wondering why. Is it really all money? Is that really what it is? It probably is. And you have some opinions, I'm sure, in the comments down below, but man, what a shame that we have so many interesting champions in the game and so many of them are just completely garbage. I really, really, really think this needs to improve. And the reason why I say it is that Plarium is going to have more competition coming around soon. That's really the biggest thing here, is there is no good competition for Raid Shadow Legends. Well, maybe Godforge is it. Maybe Godforge is the kind of competition that Plarium needs to start stepping some of this stuff up, because there really isn't a good reason to not have 1 or 2 people working on this per month, when most of this stuff, when you could literally buff the entire roster, and I'm talking just from a software development work perspective, right? You could buff the entire game roster. All the champions that need it could be done in less than a month. I 100% guarantee you that. You could give me, someone who works in software development, and somebody like Saf, a month in here, and we would buff and fix every one of these champions. And now, don't get me wrong, not every champion can be a god tier incredible champion, right? The game doesn't work like that. And they have to sell shards, they have to sell things to stay in business. That's the way this stuff works. But you can't tell me that champions like Constantine couldn't use a little boost, or Glazea, who's been trashed since the moment she was put into the game, or who else? Oh God, Rorik. Jesus, this champion is terrible. Surprisingly better reviews than I thought, but he's really not good. or Altan, who is now awful, but when he was an OG champ was decent, but now he's bad. Things change. So anyway, I wanted to make this video to point it out because, again, 275 legendaries, 278 epics, and we have had a grand total of 15 buffs through August of 2024 so far. What's the math on that? 15 divided by 275. What is the math? Let's actually do it. What's the percentage here? I want to make sure. 15 divided by 275. That's 5%. Is that 5%? Yes, 5% of the roster has gotten a buff so far this year. 95% has not. I rest my case. Anyway, guys, let me know what you think down below. Are you as perturbed and annoyed by this as I am? Because it's certainly one of the things that still really pisses me off in the game that certainly could be improved. Or maybe you're just like, you're an old man yelling at clouds. I don't know. Let me know either way, respectfully. And Plarium, if you happen to watch this, no hard feelings. I just want the game to get better, and I hope you understand that. All right, I'll catch you guys later. Big Papa Drock, out.